Welcome back, everybody. In this Python tutorial, we're going to go over how to use the Plotly package for data visualization. Before we get started, let's go over a few notes. How do I install Plotly? Go to the Plotly page on the Python package index for install instructions or see the Plotly documentation. In this tutorial, we have used the Anaconda package environment to install Plotly. What version of Plotly is used for this tutorial? In this tutorial, we will use Plotly version 5.5. How do I make plots with Plotly? Plotly plots can be made with Plotly Express, Plotly Graphobjects, figure factories, or dictionaries. What is Plotly Express? Plotly Express is the easy-to-use high-level interface to Plotly, which operates on a variety of types of data and produces easy-to-style figures. It is recommended to start with Plotly Express. However, if more options are needed, you can update the Plotly Express figure or start from scratch using a graph object. Figures made with Plotly Express can be customized in all the same ways as figures made with graph objects. Examples: update and add methods, as well as with Plotly Express specific function arguments. The functions in Plotly Express are all built on top of graph objects, and all return instances of plotly.graphobjects.figure. What are Plotly graph objects? Graph objects are low-level building blocks of figures which you can use instead of Plotly Express for greater control. What are figure factories? Figure factories are dedicated functions for creating very specific types of plots. Note that some figure factories have been deprecated. What is the difference between Plotly Express and graph objects? Plotly Express is to Seaborn, high level, as Plotly graph objects is to matplotlib, lower level. Most of the time, the same plots can be created with Plotly Express or graph objects. Usually, you can create plots with Plotly Express with much less code than graph objects. However, graph objects may provide greater control. Not all plots can be created with Plotly Express at this time, and may require graph objects or figure factories. What is a trace? Think of a trace as a plot or part of a plot. Each trace has one of more than 40 possible types. Examples include scatter, bar, pie, surface, choropleth, etc., and represents a set of related graphical marks in a figure. What is the difference between add trace and append trace? New traces can be added to a graph object figure using the addTrace method. This method accepts a graph object trace, an instance of graphobject.scatter, graphobject.bar, etc., and adds it to the figure. This allows you to start with an empty figure and adds traces to it sequentially. The append trace method does the same thing, although it does not return a figure. So basically, the add trace and the append trace do the same thing. However, the append trace does not return a figure. How do I add to or update a figure/plot? You can use update methods. Examples including update traces, update layout, update x-axis, update y-axis, etc., and/or add methods. Examples include add trace, add annotation, add shape, add vertical line, add horizontal line, add bar, and add scatter. You can use these methods to update or add to the figure/plot after a figure/plot is initially created. What is update traces? You can set options common to all traces with the update traces method. Examples include opacity, marker color, marker line width, marker size, and marker symbol, etc. What is update layout? You can use the update layout method to update the layout of a figure/plot. Examples include update title, update legend, update figure/plot size, and update style template. What is update x-axis and update y-axis? You can use these methods to update the figure/plot x and y axes. Examples include title text and tick angle. What kinds of data can be used with Plotly? The kinds of data that can be used with Plotly are long form, wide form, and mixed form. Examples include data frames, arrays, lists, and dictionaries. What is Chart Studio? Chart Studio provides a web service for hosting graphs. Public hosting is free. For private hosting, there are paid plans. Graphs are saved inside your online Chart Studio account. Do Plotly maps require an API key? Some Plotly maps require an API key. However, the examples in this tutorial do not use an API key. What is the difference between figure and figure widget? We're going to skip this one for now, but the answer is right here. How do I change a renderer? To change a renderer, you can use importplotly.io as PIO, then use pio.renderers.default and assign the renderer that you want to use, such as browser. Or you can use figure.show and put in the renderer here. The default renderer is Notebook Connected. And here we have a list of the other available renderers. How do I speed things up if I am working with a really big dataset? To speed things up for large datasets, use the ORJSON package, Data Shader, and scattergl for scatterplots. Can I use Plotly with Google Colab, Spider, Jupyter Notebooks, Jupyter Lab, and Visual Studio Code? The answer is yes, you can use Plotly with all of these. Some of these options may require some extra setup. I was able to create plots using Plotly in Google Colab, Jupyter Notebooks, and Jupyter Lab without extra setup. However, this may vary. For Spider, you can install Kaleido, which is recommended, or Orca in your Plotly package environment. To open in the default browser, you can use importplotly.io as PIO, then use pio.renderers.default and assign browser. To show the plots inline in Spider, you can use pio.renderers.default and assign SVG. For Visual Studio Code, I was able to create Plotly plots and display them in the browser, using the Anaconda Plotly package environment. Remember to use the figure.show to display the plot. Figure.show is not always necessary, but it appears to be required in this case. Can I use a Pandas Back-End? Yes, Plotly Express can be used as a pandas.plot backend. Use import pandas as PD, PD options, plotting, backend, and assign Plotly. Then you can create your figure using dataframe.plot. And you can also use the cufflinks package. Okay, now let's jump into our tutorial. For the imports, we import Plotly. Plotly.Graphobjects as Go, Plotly Express as PX, Plotly Subplots, import make subplots, Plotly IO as PIO, Pandas, NumPy, GeoPandas, Ipi Widgets, PyDataset, Vega Datasets, URLlib.request, import URL open, and JSON. If you are going to use linear regression trend lines, you may need to install stats models into your package environment. As we mentioned in the notes, the Plotly version we're using is 5.5. Also mentioned in our notes, here we have an example of how to change a renderer. The datasets we're going to use in this tutorial include weather, Gapminder, bird strikes, airports, movies, cars, arthritis, trees, housing, diamonds, and here we have a GeoPandas geodata-frame. For almost all of the examples, we're going to use either Plotly Express or Graphobjects. However, Plotly plots can be made with a dictionary. So we create our dictionary. Then we use data, and the type of the plot is a bar. Then we put in the X and Y data, and we specify the layout. Then we use pio.show, and we put in the figure. So as I mentioned, we will not be using this method, but I just wanted to show you that it is a possibility. The Plotly documentation recommends starting with Plotly Express. If you want to create a Plotly plot using Graphobjects, you can start out with GO, which is short for Graphobjects, that we imported here. Then you use .figure to create your figure. And to display the figure, you can use the variable, or you can use the variable.show. And this gives us a blank figure. Then we can take this blank figure and add elements to it. So in this example, we use the figure.addTrace, and then inside the round brackets, we use Graphobjects.bar. And this will create a basic bar chart. Here we have a slightly more complicated Graphobjects example. The first thing we did is we used Graphobjects.figure to create the figure. And inside the figure round brackets, we use Graphobjects.bar. So you can create the figure by itself and then add to it, or you can put the plot inside the round brackets. So that created the bar chart here. We can also add a line plot. And to do that, we use figure.addTrace. Inside the addTrace round brackets, we use Graphobjects.scatter. And to make the scatter plot a line plot, we assign lines and markers to mode. Then we use figure.updateTraces to update the opacity. Using update layout, we set the title and the title font size. And using update x-axis and update y-axis, we set some custom titles for the x and y axis. And to display the chart, we use fig.show. Here we have another example, similar to our previous example. However, in this case, as an alternative to the addTrace, we're going to use the figure.addScatter and the figure.addBar. So we create our figure. Then we added the bar chart to the figure, and we added the line chart to the figure. Okay, so those are a few examples of how to create Plotly plots with Graphobjects. Let's move on to our first example using Plotly Express. In this example, we're going to create a line chart. The first thing we did is we used Plotly Express.line. Then we put in our data frame, our x and y data, and a title. We assign that to the figure variable. Then we use our figure variable.show to display the line chart. And notice that we can hover the cursor over the line chart to see specific data. We also have the option to download the plot as PNG, to zoom, pan, to zoom in and zoom out, to auto-scale, and to reset the chart. Some charts might have additional options. Here we have an example of a line chart with multiple lines. And another thing to point out is that the legends are interactive, so we can click on parts of the legend. And notice that the United States is not showing, and it recreated the chart. Here we have an example of a line chart created using Graphobjects. So we created our figure. Then we used addTrace to add the lines. And remember, Plotly line charts are implemented as connected scatterplots. For the line chart, we assign lines to mode. And to add annotations, we can use figure.addAnnotation. Then we determine where we want the annotation to be positioned based on the x and y coordinates. And we put in the text for the annotation. Now let's move on to some bar chart examples. Here we have a simple bar chart using Plotly Express. To create the bar chart, we use plotlyexpress.bar. We put in our data frame and the values for x and y. To change the color of the bars, we use update traces. Next, we have a stacked bar chart. Using plotlyexpress.bar, we put in our data frame and assign x and y. And to make the bar chart a stacked bar chart, we assign a variable to the color. which is the wildlife size. And you can see our legend over here. And again, the legend is interactive. Now, a quick note. The Plotly Express bar chart and the histogram are very similar, and in some cases can be used interchangeably. Here we have an example of a grouped bar chart using Plotly Express. We will use the bird strikes data frame and put in our X and Y data. And notice for the color argument we use wildlife size, and for the bar mode we use group. In this example, we use the histogram like a bar chart. And one benefit of using the histogram as a bar chart is that with the bar charts, sometimes you get stripes across the bars. However, if you use the histogram, you don't get those stripes. Here we use the weather data frame to visualize precipitation by month. Here we have an example of a horizontal bar chart. If you would like to create a multi-level bar chart, you can do that with Graphobjects. We create our figure, then we use figure.addTrace, Graphobjects.bar, and we put in our X and Y data. And notice for the X data, we have a multi-dimensional list, or nested list. Here we have a scatterplot example using Plotly Express. To create the scatter plot, we use plotlyexpress.scatter. We put in the data frame and the X and Y data. And we have added a trend line using ordinary least squares. And we have changed the opacity. We have also used update traces to change the marker size and the marker symbol. And notice we have added some lines to our plot to help us make a prediction based on the regression line. So for a vehicle that weighs 2,135 pounds, you can expect that vehicle to get about 30 miles per gallon. To add those lines, we use figure.addShape. Another way to add lines to your plot is to use add vertical line or add horizontal line. And let's point out one more thing. When you are assigning values to your arguments, notice here we have done it two different ways. The first way, we use keyword arguments. And the second way, we use a dictionary. Here we have another scatterplot example. And in this case, what we wanted to do is to provide a border only for the Japan scatterplot points. Here. So you'll notice that the Japan scatterplot points have a dark gray border around the point. First, we create our scatter plot using plotlyexpress.scatter, and we assign that to the figure variable. Then we use the figure variable dot for each trace. And we use a lambda function with update to change the marker line width and the marker line color if the trace name is Japan. Here we have an example of a stacked area plot created using Plotly Express. Next, we have a tree map. To create a tree map with Plotly Express, you can use plotlyexpress.treemap. Put in the data, the path, and the values. And we'll go over the path more here in just a minute. Next up, we have the Sunburst Chart. To create the Sunburst Chart, we use plotlyexpress.sunburst. We put in our data and our path. Now notice for this example, the path puts the continent inside, here. And then the country on the outside, here. So the first thing we put in the path is the continent, here. Then the country, here. And to add more layers, put them in the path and they'll be added to the Sunburst Chart. And this Sunburst Chart shows us population as indicated by the size of the shapes here, and life expectancy, as indicated by our color bar. And a really cool thing about Plotly Sunburst charts is that they are interactive. If you wanted to turn this Sunburst chart into a tree map, you could do that. Next up, we have an example of a box plot using Plotly Express. To create the box plot, we use plotlyexpress.box. We put in our data and x and y. And if you want to change how the outliers are displayed, you can use the points argument. Here we have violin plots combined with box plots and strip plots. To show the box plot, we set that to true. And to show the points that we see here, which is similar to a strip plot or a scatter plot, we set that to all. Here we have an example of violin plots created with Graphobjects. And notice that we overlaid the strip plots onto the violin plots. To do that, we set the points to all, and the point position to 0. Here we have created a histogram using Plotly Express. We have also added a marginal rug plot to the top. Here's an example of a strip plot. Strip plots are similar to scatter plots where one variable is categorical, showing miles per gallon for cars by country or region. Also in this example, we have changed the order of the countries or regions using category orders. And if you wanted to move the legend, you could use the figure.update layout. And for the legend, assign new coordinates to x and y. Next up, we have a few examples of heat maps. This first example is a correlation heat map. To create the correlation heat map, we use plotlyexpress.imshow. Then we put in our correlation matrix, our color map, and we format the text for the correlation coefficients to only show 2 decimal places. Notice here we have rotated the x-axis labels. And to rotate those labels, we use update x-axis, tick angle equals 90. Here we have a density heat map. Density heat maps can be useful when a scatter plot has too many overlapping points. And this heat map example shows us the price of diamonds compared to the carat size of the diamonds. And we can see that most of the data is right here. However, if you wanted to see the scatterplot data along with the density heat map, you could do that as well. And we have an example of that here. For that, we use a graph object. Then we use add trace. We add the density heat map using histogram 2D. And then we add the scatter plot. To create a scatter matrix, you can use plotlyexpress.scatterMatrix. Then you put in your data and your dimensions. And the dimensions are here and here. If you would like to create a density contour plot, you can do that as well. In this case, we have used some housing data to show us the relationship between price and lot size. And we have combined the density contour plot with the scatter plot. To create the density contour plot, we use Plotly Express. And to add the scatter plot, we use add trace with Graphobjects. Here we have an example of a radar chart. To create the radar chart, we create our categories and our data. Then we create our figure. And to add the lines to the radar chart, we use add trace, Graphobject, scatter, polar. In this case, we want to see some ratings for 3 different vehicles. So this is for vehicle 1, vehicle 2, and vehicle 3. We can see the different cars and their ratings for reliability, fuel economy, repair cost, design, and comfort. Here we have added some marginal plots to a scatter plot. For this marginal plot, we assign histogram to marginal X. And for this marginal plot, we assign box to marginal Y. To create plots with facets, all you have to do is to use facet column and facet row, and then assign the appropriate variables. In this case, we have some arthritis data, and we want to see who has improved split between 2 variables. And you can see that here. To create subplots like we see here, we use make subplots. To import that, we use plotly.subplots import make subplots. Next, we determine how many rows and columns we want. In this case, we want 2 rows by 2 columns. To create our line plots here, we use add trace with Graphobjects using the scatter plots with the mode of lines. And to determine the placement, we assign values to row and column. So, row 1, column 1 would be here, row 1, column 2 would be here, row 2, column 1 would be here, and row 2, column 2 would be here. Another thing you can do with Plotly is to create maps. And here we have a map example, which is basically a scatter plot, where we have taken some airport locations and based on the latitude and longitude, plotted them onto the map. To create the scatterplot map, we use plotlyexpress.scattergeo. Then we put in our data frame, the latitude and the longitude, and in this case, we use the natural Earth projection. And you can see when we hover, we get the name of the airport, which we set here. Another type of map you can create with Plotly are Choropleth Maps. So the first thing we did is we pulled in our data frame with some population data. Then we pull in our GeoJSON data. And in this case, the data frame county will be matched with the GeoJSON ID to create the Choropleth map. So there's something in common between the data frame and the GeoJSON file, which is the county, which helps link them together. Then to create the Choropleth map, we use Plotly Express Choropleth Mapbox. And then we put in the appropriate arguments. You can also create Choropleth maps using GeoPandas data frames. And we have an example of that here. Next, we have an example of creating a map with a different type of projection. And here is a list of all of the different types of projections. If you would like to use Plotly with Ipi Widgets, you can do that as well. The first thing we did is we created our widget, which is a drop-down widget. Then we created our function, which will create the map and plot a specific airport that we choose from the drop-down. And here we tie the widget and the function together to create the interaction. So currently we have this airport here plotted. Let's choose a different airport. And you can see it updates the map with the new airport. Another option that Plotly offers is animation. In this example, we have an animated scatter plot. created using plotlyexpress.scatter with the gapminder data, showing us the relationship between life expectancy, GDP per capita by continent, and how it changes over time. To save a plot to HTML, you can use the variable .write HTML and then put in the path with the extension HTML. To change a theme, you can use these options here. And in this example, we are using Plotly Dark. So we've created a line plot, and we have assigned a new theme to Template. Here's another example using the ggplot2. And for our last example, let's go over how you can change configuration options. We have gone ahead and created a line plot. And we have changed some configuration options. And the first configuration option we changed is to always display the mode bar. Here. The second configuration option we changed is to allow us to draw shapes onto our plot. That's all we have for this tutorial. Join us again next time.